Lighting is by far the most powerful tool if you want to elevate your photography or video game. One is a daylight color light, one is an RGB light, one is a fixed light, not easy to carry around, one is a portable light that is easy to carry around. One can be used by batteries, one needs a cord to work. But each light comes at different price points and might work best for different scenarios. So I changed my shirt because it's another day. And yeah, this video have taken way too long. So today we're testing the Zhiyun MOLUS X60 RGB light versus the GVM 80 watt LED light, which is a daylight color light, to see which of these lights are best for creators. And we will talk about light output, color rendering, versatility, and the overall use of these two lights. So stick around because I will of course be showing some real world test footage for you to see, so you can always get an idea on how these lights are performing against each other. So to be transparent, I got the MOLUS light from Zhiyun for free to test it out and to make a video here on YouTube. But I have not been instructed in any way on what to say, and Zhiyun have not seen this video before that I am publishing it live here on YouTube for you to see. The GVM light is a light that I've bought myself for my own money a couple of years ago, and it is still a light that I am using today. So before we test out the lights, let's just quickly compare them to see what we're talking about. So the Zhiyun MOLUS X60 is a really compact 60 watt RGB light that can run on AC power and on battery. It has a standard screw mount down here that you can use to attach the light to a lighting stand. The MOLUS doesn't have a standard Bowens mount though, so you need an adapter to use it if you want to be using it with a modifier like a softbox that has a Bowens mount. What you get is an attachable battery that also works as a power bank. Then you get charging cables and the AC cords, so you can plug it in and use it. Then you get this tiny metal thing and a rubber modifier. And you also get a carrying or storage case, which is pretty nice. And then Zhiyun has an app for you to control the light and use it. But you can also use the knobs on the light, of course. For the GVM 80 watt, this is a bigger and more bulky light, and it only runs on AC power. It is a budget-friendly LED light with a slightly higher wattage rating than the Zhiyun light. Then it has a standard Bowens mount that you attach to here. And then it is attached to this mounting system that you can attach to a light stand. And the light I bought, I only got the light, but you can find combos on Amazon though with a softbox and a light stand too. GVM also has an app that you can control the light with, just so you know. So these were the specs of the lights, but specs doesn't always tell the truth. So let's see how these two lights perform in my testing. So for the brightness or output test, it would have been really nice to have a light meter to test this out, but I don't have that. But I've come up with some perhaps not scientifically and lab proven tests to see which lights performs the best. And although these are not like scientifically proven tests, I still think that this is a useful way to test them out because we're doing the same with both lights. First of all, I have an app here on my phone that can read out the logs from the light. But stay tuned because I have another test where I'll be using the metering from the camera to test out the output of the light as well. So for this app, you have to place the front screen from the telephone towards the light for it to measure, which is a little bit annoying, but let's try it out. So I'm trying to place the phone at the exact same distance between the light to make sure that this is a fair reading. For this, I am using a ruler to keep the distance the same. So even though I am using a ruler to keep a somewhat consistent distance between the lights and the telephone, one factor that will influence the outcome of the measurement here is if the telephone is not completely vertical. Because if it's leaning a bit towards the light, it will have a higher outcome. And if it's leaning away from the light, it will have a lower outcome, which kind of messes this test a little bit up. But I will try to do my best to keep it vertical, and let's see how it goes. So what we're going to do is we're going to see the output on 3%, on 50% and 100%. Both lights are set to 5600 Kelvin. The Zhiyun light will only be using the battery because this is really what makes this light so damn good that you don't need to plug it in to use it. For the Zhiyun light, around 3% will get a reading around 3700 to 3800, while the GVM lights only get around 105 to 110. But you can clearly see the difference in the output as well. For the 50% reading, the Zhiyun light is around 11,500. And the GVM light is also reading around this number, perhaps a little bit less. For the 100% reading, the flute sounds a bit different. I don't know if you can say this in English because it's probably just a Danish saying, but what I mean is that the situation has changed. Because the Zhiyun light only reads around 18,600 and the GVM light is now reading around 26,200. But let's see if the camera metering test gives us the same result. So for the test here, I am placing the lights in the same position and shining them towards the white wall. I will be using my camera at manual settings, and I will then take a photo of each light at different settings, and we can then compare the waveform in Premiere Pro to see which line has the highest output. I've set both lights to 5600 Kelvin to make it an even contest. I will start out with the Zhiyun light and I will set this to 50%, and I will dial in the settings on the camera to have an even exposure. For this we are setting the camera to shutter speed 1/100, the aperture to 4.5 and the ISO to 100. This reads an even exposure and we will take a photo. For the GVM light, it actually reads an even exposure at 50% as well. We can take the photos here and put them into Lightroom, and then I will export the RAWs into JPEGs and we can put them in Premiere Pro and we will see the waveform and how it looks. If we compare the two photos in the waveform in Premiere Pro, we can see that it looks like the Zhiyun light has a slightly higher output at 50% with around 56 IRE versus 52, 54 from the GVM light. If we do the same, have the exact same settings, but put the lights at 100%, we can see that the Zhiyun seems to be one stop overexposed now, reading 1.3 at the metering, while the GVM is 2 stops overexposed with a reading of 0.7 on the metering. If we take the photos into the waveform again, we can see that the Zhiyun now is around 72, 73 IRE and the GVM light is sitting at 78, 79 IRE. So this indicates that the Zhiyun light at 50% has a slightly higher output than the GVM light, but at 100% the GVM light has a slightly higher output than the Zhiyun light. I also did this at 3%, and funny enough, the Zhiyun light shows around 30 IRE at 3%, while the GVM light only shows around 3-4 IRE at 3%. So it is possible to dial the GVM light into a lesser output than with the Zhiyun light. And it really makes sense because when I'm using the Zhiyun light, it is really bright even at the lower levels. So for the color test, we'll be taking the same photos and we will put them into Lightroom to see how the white balance is. I will then try to use the color picker on the white wall to see how Lightroom corrects the photos, and yeah, we can see how the color shifts work when we are working in Lightroom at least. Again, this is not really scientific, but we are using the same method for both lights, so I think it is a fair way to see how this works here in real life at least. And of course I will try to use the color picker at the same spot on every photo. First of all, Lightroom interprets all the photos at 5800 Kelvin plus 6 in the magenta tint, which is really interesting. When we use the color picker on the Zhiyun photos, it corrects the photos a tiny bit. At 50% it changes the values to 5550 plus 13 on the magenta tint. At 100% it changes it to 5600 plus 14 on the magenta tint. This indicates a small correction from a warmer tone with a green tint in it, because the image is getting more blue and it is getting a bit of magenta, which means that it is apparently more green and warmer than what Lightrooms want it to be if it's supposed to be pure white. For the GVM light, we get a slightly different result. At 50% it reads 5950 plus 14 in the magenta, and at 100% it corrects it to 5900 with a plus 12 in the magenta. So this makes the photo warmer, and it adds some purple, which indicates that these photos have a cooler tone with a green tint in it, because the Lightroom correction adds some warmth and some magenta to it. So since we're here, I will also do a video skin tone test where I will shoot myself like this for both lights, and we can see how these performs with the RGB parade and the vector scope. In the shots, I will also be filming a gray card, so we can try to use the white balance picker on this to see how Premiere Pro corrects the colors. I will be shooting in S-Log 3, and I will be applying the same LUT conversion to make it Rec 709 for both images. So the light will not be at the same output, but the camera settings will be at the same. This means that I will be adjusting the lights to achieve the same exposure in each shot. So the results are quite interesting because the Zhiyun looks a bit warmer and perhaps a bit magenta. If I color pick the gray card, it actually adds some more warmth, and depending on where I click, it stays the same with the magenta and green, or it adds a little bit of green to it. This indicates that the Zhiyun lights still needs some warmth to have a even white balance, and I guess that the magenta green cast is pretty close to what Premiere Pro perceives as white, but it still turns towards the green, which indicates there is a bit too much magenta in the shot. For the GVM light, it looks more or less the same, I think, but perhaps it's a little bit less saturated and slightly less magenta. If we color correct this, it also adds some warmth, but more than with the Zhiyun light. And it adds some green to counter the magenta as well. If we look at the RGB parade without any adjustments, there is definitely some more red here in the Zhiyun light, while the green and blue channels are pretty close to each other. Even though I didn't do these two tests with the same gray card, I still think it's pretty interesting that the results are different. In Lightroom, both lights get added magenta to correct the white balance, while in Premiere Pro they both get added a bit of green to correct it. In Lightroom, the Zhiyun light gets cooled down while the GVM light gets warmed up. But in Premiere Pro, both lights get warmed up, even though the GVM lights get warmed up a little bit more than the Zhiyun light. So a reason for some of these differences might be that Lightroom and Premiere Pro are handling colors differently. It can also be to the fact that in Lightroom we are correcting on raw photos, while in Premiere Pro we are using video, which more or less is JPEG. So for the versatility, it is pretty clear that the Zhiyun light beats the GVM light. Being able to take it with you and use it with simply just a battery, so no AC plug-in, is pretty damn awesome. And you can take this light and put it in places that the GVM light can never come. For instance, I have my GVM light always on a stand here on my desk, and I really never take it anywhere else because it is just not that practical. On the other hand, the Zhiyun light I can take everywhere I want in the apartment, and I can shoot where I want, more or less. This is a really nice way to use a light, and it's a really great thing to have in your arsenal. Also, being an RGB light, you can change the color temperature and the colors, which is a really creative, great tool to have. But on the other hand, if you're only shooting talking headshots, then a daylight balanced light is also pretty good. But I think the takeaway here is that the MOLUS light is more than just a light. It is really a creative tool for you to use, while the GVM light is a pretty good interview talking head light to have if you are doing these kinds of shots. So here you have my actually quite comprehensive test of these two lights. It took way longer than what I planned it for, but I think the results are pretty interesting, and I hope you can use these if you are considering buying a new light. At least for me, I think it's pretty interesting to see the difference in the light output and also the difference in how they produce the colors. Both lights need a bit of correction to achieve a perfectly balanced image, but perhaps the Zhiyun light needs a little less than the GVM, but only in a slight marginal. I still think that the GVM light does pretty well though. When it comes to output, they are pretty close, but the GVM light has a bit more output. When it comes to the usage of the lights, the MOLUS light from Zhiyun is quite better, but if you're just going to use this for a talking head, then the GVM is more than fine. Overall, I think that both lights are pretty good, and I will still be continuing to using the GVM light here on the stand and the MOLUS light when I need more portability. So what are your thoughts here on the test, and which light do you prefer? Let me know in the comment section. I'd be happy to hear what you are thinking. Anyway guys, I am testing a brand new Sony lens that hasn't been released yet. So if you're interested in this, then please stay put, because I will be sharing a video pretty soon about this new lens. Anyway guys, this was all for now. Take care. Boy.